I think that if you found the evidence in nature for God, then scientists would have to go along with it. And there have been many points throughout history where natural arguments were very good arguments for the existence of God. Often you'll hear creationists will say, well, evolution is not a good theory because it's not falsifiable. Well, it's eminently falsifiable. You can think of any number of ways fossils could be discovered out of order, and so on. So that was the story of natural theology. Evolution was one part of it that could have been provided ample evidence for God, and quite the contrary. Now we look at it as evidence against God. The argument for the creation requiring outside forces was a good argument until cosmology came along in the 20th century and showed that it could be perfectly natural. We can't prove that it happened any one of these ways, but we certainly have a plausible explanation that solves the God of the gaps problem. The God of the gaps is the argument that if you can't explain something in science, and therefore you need God to explain it. I suppose that you could say, well, let me design a God that is consistent with nature in all that way. That would be kind of a naturalistic religion, and there are any number of attempts to go along those lines. But the problem is that they end up sending you into the same sort of circles that you do with much of current theology, that you have to explain by means of a supernatural force something that has no need of being explained by a supernatural force. So they're not parsimonious. If you think of in terms of Occam's razor, where the simplest hypothesis is the one to be preferred, then God is not the simplest hypothesis in that case. He's only the simplest hypothesis when you have no other explanation except God. This is one of the things that I always have trouble with in arguing with theists, is they seem to think that God is some kind of explanation. But I don't see how just assuming God did it all without telling me how God did it all. First of all, they demand that I tell them how the universe did it all, and I do the best I can to do that, to provide plausible scenarios for that. But then they turn around and say, well, then you didn't convince me, so therefore God must have did it. Well, in that case, all they're doing is they're finding God as a name. They're just using that as a word to refer to something they don't understand. That's not enough, I mean, to convince yourself that God exists.